In the heart of New York, a simple moment inside the city's most exclusive restaurant changes everything. Stay with us until the end. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The restaurant was not merely a place to eat. Lyell was a performance, a theater of wealth and elegance in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side. The lighting was soft, golden, washing the room in an almost sacred glow. Every table was draped with white linen so crisp it seemed untouched by human hands, and each place setting gleamed with silver polished until it reflected the chandeliers above. The air smelled faintly of seared scallops, aged whiskey, and perfume that cost more than a Lara Vance made in a month. For Alara, Lyell was a second world. 6 nights a week she transformed into someone else. She traded worn sneakers for stiff black flats, faded jeans for a pressed uniform, her real face for a polite smile. Here she was invisible, a ghost gliding between tables. Guests never remembered her name, only that their glasses stayed full and their plates disappeared without effort. That was the point. At 20 years old, she had already mastered the art of vanishing while standing in plain sight. Her real life was back in Queens in a cramped fourth-floor walk-up where the windows rattled every time the elevated train passed. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. Yet, when she opened the door, the air always carried a softer note. The lavender detergent her mother used to wash everything by hand. Amelia Vance was fragile, gentle, and forgetful. She lived with a fog in her mind that thickened whenever she tried to recall the years before waking up in a hospital bed 2 decades earlier. Her memories had been stripped clean by a head injury, leaving only shadows she could never chase down. The one constant she had carried from that lost life was a ring. A sterling silver band carved into 2 phoenixes, wings entwined around a sapphire the color of midnight. She wore it on a chain against her skin, never removing it. "It feels like part of me," she would say when Alara asked. No matter that she didn't know who had given it to her. No matter that she couldn't remember the world before the fall. The ring was her anchor. For Alara, the replica she wore around her wrist was the same, a reminder that they had a mystery, a history, even if it was incomplete. On her 18th birthday, her mother had saved enough for a jeweler in Chinatown to craft a smaller version, delicate and thin, with tiny phoenix wings capturing a glass sapphire. "So you'll always have a piece of me," Amelia had whispered. Alara never took it off. That night in Lyell, her section had been assigned one table nobody else wanted. The corner seat overlooking Central Park, reserved for Alistair Sterling. Even the senior waiters found excuses to avoid him. He was a man who bent the world to his will, the head of Sterling Industries, a conglomerate whose reach stretched from transoceanic shipping to luxury real estate. The papers called him the Howard Hughes of his era. Brilliant, reclusive, ruthless. The whispers called him something else, a widower haunted by a loss so devastating he had never recovered. He sat alone, back rigid, his dark suit absorbing the golden light. His hair was threaded with silver, his jawline sharp as stone. He ate with mechanical precision, as if food was nothing but fuel. The other waiters avoided his gaze, treating him like a storm that might break at any second, and so the task fell to the new girl. Alara steadied her tray and approached. "Good evening, sir. May I start you off with a drink?" His eyes did not lift from the phone in his hand. "Malin, 25. Neat." The voice was deep, gravelly, dismissive. She moved through the motions. A glass set on the table with practiced grace, a refill of water, the rhythm of service uninterrupted. He ate, he drank, and he did not once look at her. She might as well have been invisible, the kind of anonymity she had perfected. But when she set down his dessert, a deconstructed tiramisu balanced on a slate plate, her cuff brushed against the handle of his fork. For the first time that evening, Alistair Sterling's head lifted. Irritation flickered across his features, but his eyes did not stop on her face. They locked instead on the fine silver chain circling her wrist. The fork slipped from his hand and struck the plate with a sound that cracked the hush of the dining room. He froze. His eyes widened, fixed on the delicate band dangling against her pulse. Alara blinked, unsure what she had done wrong. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't just staring at jewelry, he was staring as if he'd seen a ghost rise from the dead. His chest rose and fell sharply, breath caught in his throat. She tried to step back, but his gaze pinned her in place. Her training screamed at her to apologize, to vanish into the background again, but some nervous spark pushed her to speak instead. She raised her wrist slightly, forcing a small smile. "It's a beautiful design, isn't it?" The little phoenix catches the light, then, with a voice soft but steady, she added 7 simple words, the words that would rip open a past buried for 2 decades. "Sir, my mom has the same ring." The sound of her voice was almost drowned by the rush of blood in his ears. For Alistair Sterling, those words detonated inside him like dynamite. His entire body went rigid. His face drained of color, leaving him ashen, a man staring down the impossible. "What?" His voice cracked, raw, nothing like the cold baritone from moments earlier. "What did you say?" Alara faltered, but repeated herself. "My mom. She has one just like it, only larger. It's her most treasured possession." She lifted her wrist again as though it might explain everything. Alistair's hand shot up, not to grab her, but to hold something invisible away from him, trembling violently. His gray eyes were locked on hers now, a storm of anguish and desperate hope raging behind them. "Your mother," he stammered, words scraping out of him like broken glass. "Her name." "What is her name?" But before she could answer, his body betrayed him. A strangled sound tore from his throat, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed forward onto the table. The plate shattered, the tiramisu scattered across linen, and then his entire frame crumpled to the floor with a sickening thud. Screams erupted. The room's hushed elegance fractured into chaos. Chairs scraped back, voices shouted, phones appeared in frantic hands. "Call 911!" the manager cried, his French accent sharpened by panic. John Pierce rushed forward, his face a mask of horror. Alara stumbled back, her own breath ragged. A moment ago, she had been invisible. Now, a billionaire lay unconscious at her feet, and everyone was staring at her as if she had pulled the trigger. Paramedics arrived with alarming speed, strapping Alistair Sterling to a gurney, their movements brisk and efficient. Yet, before they wheeled him out, another figure stepped forward from across the room. Tall, impeccably dressed with the calm authority of a man who solved crises for breakfast. Marcus Thorne, Sterling's lawyer and closest confidant. He surveyed the scene with a hawk's focus. His eyes caught on Alara, lingered on the chain around her wrist. He said nothing to her directly. Instead, he slipped a business card into the trembling hands of John Pierce. His voice was quiet but steely, a command disguised as a suggestion. "Find out everything about her. Her name, her address. I want it by morning. And make sure she doesn't go anywhere." Then he turned and followed the gurney out into the Manhattan night, leaving Alara standing in the wreckage of her own life. The silver phoenixes on her wrist had never felt heavier. By the time the sun rose over the East River, Liel had already erased the previous night. The linen was changed, the glass polished, the silence restored. Only Alara still carried the echo. She lay awake on her futon in Queens, the ceiling hairline cracks mapped in the half-light, replaying the scene again and again. The way his gaze had snapped to the chain at her wrist, the question he hadn't managed to hear the answer to. The collapse that turned every face in the restaurant toward her as if she were the accelerant to a fire she hadn't meant to start. Her phone lay dark beside her. No calls from the manager, no messages from coworkers. The absence said everything. She showered, dressed, brewed tea for her mother, and set the chipped mug on the kitchen table. The steam curled upward, carrying the lavender-scented warmth of home through the cool morning air. "Morning, honey," Amelia said, soft-voiced, tucked into her robe, her feet in wool socks. She was reading a library paperback she had already forgotten 3 times, each time rediscovering it with a kind of gentle surprise. The ring on its chain lay against the hollow of her throat, catching the light that crept between the blinds. It made her look both fragile and invincible. A survivor crowned with a secret. Laura poured herself coffee and failed to keep her hands from shaking. "I might be late tonight," she said. "Double shift." It came out on reflex, the lie of habit. There would be no shift. She had been told, politely, firmly, not to come in until further notice. "Company policy," the manager had whispered like a prayer he hoped might save him, save them all. A knock interrupted the fragile morning. Not the uncertain rap of a neighbor. A precise, restrained knock that assumed the door would open. Alara opened it to a man in a driver's cap, in a black suit so flawlessly pressed it seemed sculpted. Behind him idled a black town car, sleek as a panther's back. The driver removed his cap, respectfully, not deferentially, and inclined his head. "Miss Alara Vance?" he asked. "Yes." "Mr. Marcus Thorne requests your presence." The wording made it sound voluntary. His posture made it feel otherwise. "He asked me to assure you this is for your benefit." Alara's gaze flicked past the driver to the town car, then over her shoulder to her mother, who was pretending not to listen and failing. My mother." "You may bring her, if you prefer," the driver said without missing a beat. "Or Mr. Thorne can arrange for someone to sit with her while you're gone." Amelia saved her from choosing. "Go," she said, closing the paperback around a finger to hold her place. "It's all right, dear." "I'm fine." Her smile tried to be reassuring and nearly got there. "I'll steep another pot." Bring back stories. Alara's heartbeat felt loud in her ears, a drum under the thin plaster of the walls. She grabbed her coat, a knotted scarf, and hesitated, then slid the tiny phoenix bracelet higher on her wrist, where it wouldn't dangle so obviously. The driver opened the rear door and stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled like new leather and silence. The city, once the door thudded closed, became a mute film sliding past the windows. They did not go to a law office. The car curved uptown, crossed into hospital territory, and finally swept beneath the portico of a private wing attached to a well-known Manhattan medical center. Inside, the lobby was hushed. There were no crowds, only the soft whir of carpeted hallways and the watchful gaze of discreet security. Marcus Thorne met her by the elevator, as if he'd timed it to the second. He was taller up close, a man whose presence fit any room like custom tailoring. No ostentation, just an exactness that suggested nothing in his life was accidental. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a steady, cool hand. "Thank you for coming." His eyes, clear and assessing, found her face and stayed there. Not her clothes, not the nervous hands, but the person. It startled her more than the car. "Is he—" She couldn't finish. Collapsed. She couldn't say the word. "Stable," Thorne said. "The doctors have ruled out a cardiac event. They believe it was a severe psychological shock." He paused. which means whatever he saw mattered. To him. A great deal. Alara held his gaze, felt the building tilt under the weight of implication. He saw a bracelet, she said, a copy of my mother's ring. Thorne didn't blink. Yes. The elevator doors opened without a chime, the carpet inside the color of deep ocean. They rose quietly, the numbers ticking up like a pulse. On the top floor, a single security guard stood at a pair of oak doors, expression impassive, hands loosely folded. Thorne nodded. The guard nodded back and opened one door. "Before we go in," Thorne said, his voice softening by a single degree, "you should know one thing that is not a secret, but is often forgotten. 20 years ago, Mr. Sterling lost his wife. He has not been the same. He functions at a level most people would call extraordinary, but that is not the same as living." He measured Alara's face for reaction and found about what he expected, empathy shaded by fear. "Be mindful," he finished simply. He ushered her inside. The suite was larger than her entire apartment. Expensive without being ostentatious. A wall of glass offered a view of the city, but the blinds were half drawn, laying the room in a careful dusk. A monitor ticked softly somewhere, steady but not intrusive. And in a high-backed armchair by the window, not in the bed, sat Alistair Sterling. He looked different from the man at Liel. Smaller, somehow, the armor stripped back to skin, silk robe, bare feet and hospital slippers, an IV that seemed embarrassed to announce itself. His eyes, though, those were unchanged. Gray, precise, and tonight fever bright. He didn't stand. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room like weather. "Miss Vance?" he said. The voice was hoarse, as if dragged across gravel. "Thank you." Alara took a step, then another. She felt as if she were approaching the edge of a cliff, the kind of drop that could make a person feel dizzy even from a photograph. There was a chair opposite him. She sat because standing felt like a challenge. "The ring," he said, and the words nearly broke. "You said your mother has one." Alara nodded, throat tight. Where did she get it? The question was not curiosity. It was a lifeline he was trying not to yank on too hard. "My mother doesn't know," Alara said. She kept her voice level by force. She woke up in a small hospital north of San Francisco about 20 years ago. No ID, no memory. They named her Amelia. The ring was on a chain around her neck. He closed his eyes, pain skimming across. His face then opened them again with care. "The ring," he said, and every syllable spelled out reverence. "I designed it." He swallowed, the muscle in his jaw clenching. "There is only one in the world, 2 phoenixes, wings intertwined. A blue sapphire like the ocean at Big Sur just before the fog comes in. I gave it to my wife, Liana, on our first anniversary." His voice went quiet, intimate, as if he were speaking to the memory itself. "She wore it the day she died." Alara didn't breathe for 3 beats. She could feel the room contracting around the words. Anniversary, died, ocean, until they pressed against her ribs. She made herself ask the question that had no graceful shape. How did she... Her car went off Bixby Bridge, he said, each consonant too sharp. Highway 1, above the Pacific. There was wreckage, pieces of the car, a scrap of her dress, but the ocean keeps what it takes. He steadied himself on the arm of the chair and looked at Alara as if the truth might fall out of her if he watched long enough. They never found her. They never found the ring. The soft beep of the monitor seemed very loud. Alara folded her hands together so he wouldn't see them shake. My mother calls the ring an anchor, she said quietly. She says it feels like part of her. He flinched as if the word had been a thrown object that hit him squarely. "Anchor," he repeated, closing his eyes again for a heartbeat. "Yes." He breathed once, deeply, as if diving. "Miss Vance, Alara." He said her name cautiously, as if it might explode. "May I see her?" The request was simple in sound and enormous in weight. Alara felt its gravity tug her toward yes. She thought of her mother's soft confusion, the fog that rolled in whenever the past tried to form a coastline. She thought of the ring and how Amelia's fingers sometimes closed around it in sleep. "My mother she's gentle," Alara said. "The doctors said her memories before the fall are inaccessible. Sometimes when she tries too hard, it makes her anxious for days. I can't let anything hurt her." "I won't," he said too quickly. He caught himself and tried again. "I won't." "I'm not asking for an explanation or a demand. If there is even a chance, 1 in a billion, that the woman you love as your mother is the same woman I lost, I have to take it. I cannot keep living under a question mark the size of my life." The words were not polished. They were unguarded, raw. Something in Alara, some stubborn core that loved truth more than it feared trouble, leaned toward him. Marcus Thorne had stayed back by the door, a silent metronome of composure. Now he stepped forward a single pace, voice low. "If you agree, Miss Vance, we will proceed on your terms. Time, place, conditions, no press, no entourage." His eyes flicked to Sterling, a boundary drawn without needing chalk. "I will make sure of it." Alara looked from one man to the other. Billionaire and lawyer, power and precision. And then she thought of her fourth-floor walk-up. The window shade that stuck, the lavender detergent, the ring against her mother's skin. She pictured that hospital in California her mother could not remember, the place that had given her a name and a life. "Harmony Creek," she said aloud, surprising herself. "That's the hospital." Harmony Creek Community, hours inland from the bridge. The nurses named her Amelia because she kept saying, "I'm," and then getting lost. Heat rose in Alara's face. She felt suddenly, fiercely protective of the dignity of that faltering sentence. "No one came for her," she added, and heard the accusation in it, though it wasn't aimed at the man in front of her so much as at the shape of the past itself. Alistair took the blow without flinching. "No one came," he echoed, as if tasting the salt of it, "because I buried her." On paper. And in my mind his hands trembled just enough for the light to find it. I was not brave enough to look where the pain lived. Silence spread, not uncomfortable exactly, more like a clearing in a forest where the ground is soft and the air is cool. Finally, Alara nodded once. "All right," she said. "You can see her, but my way." She lifted a hand and ticked off rules as she found them, one by one. "No cars outside our building, no cameras, no name, no Liana. You don't press. If she's frightened, it ends. If she asks you to leave, you leave. I agree," he said before she finished, relief and terror colliding in his eyes. "Tonight," Alara added, because waiting would only feed the storm. 7. After dinner, Thorne was already moving, softly, the way a chess player touches a single piece when he's finally seen the line. "I'll arrange the route," he said. "We'll drop you 2 blocks away. Mr. Sterling will walk. No security at the door, only at the perimeter. We will not be seen." Alara stood because sitting felt suddenly like a confession. "I need to go." "Home," she said. "Prepare her." "Of course," Thorne replied. "The car will return you." She hesitated at the door, feeling a tug, a question she didn't want to ask but couldn't leave unspoken. She turned back to the man by the window. "If it isn't her," she said, and hated the sound of it. "If it's just a coincidence." He absorbed the thought without recoil, though it scraped him raw. "Then I will thank you," he said, voice steady, surprising them both, "and I will go back to my ruin knowing I was, at least, brave enough to look." A thin, tired smile ghosted across his mouth and vanished. "But if it is her, if she is, then we will go as slowly as the truth demands." The elevator pressed down her stomach on the way to the lobby. Back in the car, the sis-did regained its volume, but the sound was different, like returning to a room that looks the same and discovering the furniture has shifted 2 inches in every direction. She texted the driver her address before he could ask, and sat with her hands flat on her knees, steadying breath against the rise and fall of traffic. At home, Amelia had tidied the kitchen twice and arranged the same small bouquet of supermarket daisies 3 different ways. She looked up when Alara came in, face open, curious. "Well?" Alara set her keys in the dish by the door. She crossed the room and knelt by her mother's chair, taking both of her hands, warm, fine-boned, familiar. The ring pressed lightly against Alara's wrist. "Mom," she said, and chose each word like a stone she was building a bridge with. "An old friend might visit tonight, someone who thinks he knew you from before." Amelia's eyes widened a fraction. Fear, yes, but something else too. The hunger that belonged to anyone who'd ever lost a piece of themselves and caught the scent of it on the wind. "From before," she repeated. She looked down, as she always did, to the ring. Her thumb brushed the phoenix wings, the gesture half prayer, half habit. "Do I know his name?" "He asked that we not use names," Alara said, filtering truth through kindness. "He's important. But he'll come alone. No one else has to know." She swallowed. "If you don't want this, we don't do it." Amelia studied her daughter's face the way some people study paintings. Head slightly tilted, silent stretching, choosing meaning carefully. "If I feel lost," she said, "will you?" "I'll stop it." Alara managed a smile that felt fragile but real. "You set the rules." Amelia nodded, relief and terror trading places in her eyes. "Then let me make tea," she said, which was how she prepared for everything, with water, leaves, heat, and time. "And I will wear a nicer blouse so I don't embarrass your old friend." Alara kissed her forehead and went to make the apartment ready in the ways that mattered and the ways that didn't. She straightened the Afghan on the couch, wiped a coffee ring off the table, opened the blinds just enough to catch the last of the day, then closed them again to keep the street from looking in. She gathered the stack of unopened mail and slid it into a drawer. She took the photograph of herself at 5 o'clock off the mantel and set it back again, unsure whether it would help or harm. Every choice felt like it might tip a scale she couldn't see. She changed into a sweater that made her feel capable and put her hair back so it would stay out of her face. When she passed the mirror by the door, she paused, not out of vanity, but to study the features a stranger had searched last night as if they might answer a prayer. She saw Amelia's mouth, someone else's eyes, and the small silver phoenix at her wrist gleaming. At 6:30, the street outside was ordinary. A dog walker, a delivery bike with a careless bell, the first shutter click of evening windows going dark. At 6:45, a black SUV eased around the corner and kept going, not pausing, just enough for Alara to know it was theirs. At 6:55, she stood by the door with her hand on the chain. At 6:58, there was another of those precise, restrained knocks. She opened the door to a man who looked like a careful version of the legend the papers printed. No suit, a gray sweater, dark slacks, shoes meant for walking city blocks, not carpets. He held a small bouquet of white freesias. Their scent, when it reached her, was clean and almost painfully innocent. "For you," Alistair said softly when Amelia stepped into view, and the room shifted into a different gravity. Alara stood back, the space between them arranged as deliberately as a set stage. Tea steamed on the table. The blinds made a soft ladder alight on the rug. No names, no demands, only the ring against Amelia's skin and the 7 words Alara had spoken the night before, vibrating still like a struck bell. Outside, the city kept its appointments. Inside, time did something else. It slowed and leaned in. "Hello?" Amelia said, voice careful as a hand reaching into fog. "It's nice to meet you." "It's been a long time," he answered, barely above a whisper. Alara's breath caught, but she let it go. The rules were set. The stage was ready. Whatever happened next would not be forced. It would arrive like a memory does, sideways, sure of itself, in its own unhurried hour. And when the clock on the stove ticked past 7, Alara realized she was not afraid anymore. She was ready. Not for answers. Those would wound if they came too fast. But for the shape of truth settling into the room like a guest who meant to stay. She sat down, hands folded in her lap, and watched as the past walked toward the present, step by careful step. The small apartment in Queens had never felt so heavy with silence. Every tick of the wall clock landed like a drumbeat in Alara's chest. She smoothed the Afghan on the couch a 3rd time, then hovered by the window, peeking through the blinds as if expecting the whole block to be watching. The air smelled faintly of lavender and steeped tea, Amelia's quiet preparation for the evening. At exactly 7, there was a knock. Not frantic, not casual, precise. 3 soft raps, as controlled as a heartbeat. Alara's pulse jumped. She crossed to the door, checked the chain, then opened it. Alistair Sterling stood there, not as the billionaire the newspapers worshipped or feared, but as a man stripped down to his most fragile hope. He had come without entourage, just as promised. No chauffeur at the curb, no security at the door. He had dismissed the car blocks away and walked under the buzzing streetlights, carrying only a small bouquet of white freesias. Their sweet, clean fragrance drifted into the narrow hall. "She always said they smelled like memories," he murmured, voice roughened with something between awe and fear. Alara stepped back, motioning him inside. Her heart thudded as she turned toward her mother. Amelia sat in her favorite armchair near the lamp, dressed in a pale blouse and skirt she hadn't worn in years. She had pinned her hair back with deliberate care, though silver strands escaped around her temples. Her hands folded over her lap, but one finger traced the outline of the phoenix ring through the fabric. A nervous tick she didn't notice. When her eyes met his, the room seemed to collapse inward. For Alistair, it was as though the air had been punched from his lungs. 2 decades of grief, of searching faces in crowds and shadows in dreams, crashed against the sight of her. She was older, lined with years, but it was her, his Leanna. The woman he had kissed goodbye on a California morning and never seen again. The ring at her throat glimmered as if mocking him with proof. Amelia, for her part, froze in the chair, her mind fogged but stirred by something buried deep. She studied the stranger, the bouquet in his hand, the storm in his gray eyes. Something about him pulled at her chest, an ache with no name. She pressed her palm against the ring as though it could steady her. "Hello?" he whispered. The word trembled out of him like a prayer. "It's been a long time." Amelia's lips parted. She blinked, tilted her head. I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" The question pierced him, but he did not flinch. He had sworn he would not. He lowered himself into the sofa across from her, laying the freesias carefully on the table between them. The space between their chairs felt like a chasm, yet smaller than the 20 years that had already separated them. No names, Alara reminded gently, her voice like a thread holding the moment together. She perched on the edge of the couch, alert, ready to step in if her mother faltered. Alistair nodded once in gratitude, then turned back to Amelia. I knew a woman, he began slowly, his tone soft, as if telling a story to a child. She was stubborn and fearless. She loved old black-and-white movies and would sing along to songs she barely knew, off-key, until everyone around her was laughing. She had a terrible time cooking pasta. Once we turned the kitchen white with flour, trying, and she wore a ring, 2 phoenixes holding a sapphire like the one you have. Amelia's brow furrowed. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers tightening on the chain. The ring, she echoed faintly. Yes, I've always had it. I don't know from where, but it feels like me, as if it belongs. Alistair swallowed hard. The man who gave it to her loved her more than life itself, he said, voice breaking at the edges. He still does. Her eyes filled, not with recognition but with something more elusive, like the faint scent of a flower carried on wind. She turned her gaze to the mantel, where a framed photograph of a 5-year-old Alara smiled in pigtails on her first day of school. Amelia's lips trembled. I have a daughter, she whispered, her voice fierce. Now. She's my world. When I had nothing else, she gave me a reason to live. Alistair followed her gaze, and the realization struck him like a lightning bolt. Pregnant. She had survived the fall, the wreckage, the amnesia, and she had carried their child, his child. His eyes blurred, and he gripped his knees to steady himself, afraid the moment would shatter if he reached out too soon. Alara shifted, uncertain. The air in the room thickened with truths that had no shape yet. She wanted to speak, to break the silence, but the weight of their shared breath kept her still. Then Amelia's voice, soft and hesitant. There was a song. Someone used to hum it when I couldn't sleep. Her eyes drifted upward, unfocused, seeing a place beyond the room. I've hummed it to Alara sometimes. I don't know where it came from. It just lives in me. Alistair froze, his blood roaring in his ears. What song? He asked, barely daring. Her lips parted, and a low hum filled the air, a simple, haunting melody, slightly off-key but tender, a lullaby. For Alistair, the world fell away. That tune had been his mother's lullaby, passed to him, passed to Liana. He had hummed it to her once on their honeymoon, whispering it against her hair as she fell asleep. No one else could know it, no one. His body moved before his mind. He crossed the space in 2 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her chair. He did not touch her, did not dare. He only looked up, tears coursing freely down his face. Liana, he whispered, not as a question this time, but as a truth, a prayer, a homecoming. The name fell over her like a warm blanket. Not frightening, not foreign, familiar. Right. Something in her chest loosened, as though a door cracked open just enough for light to seep through. Her hand trembled, then rose, fingertips brushing his tear-wet cheek. The connection was small, fragile, but it was enough. Behind them, Alara pressed her hands to her mouth, tears burning her own eyes. She wasn't only Alara Vance anymore, daughter of Amelia with no past. She was the daughter of Liana and Alistair Sterling, the living bridge between love lost and love reborn. The room held its breath as 3 lives, separated by years of lies and silence, began to knit together in the space of a single song. While the fragile reunion in Queens unfolded in whispers and trembling touches, across the city Marcus Thorne was orchestrating a very different kind of confrontation. His battlefield was not a living room softened by lamplight, but the shadowed corridors of power and record-keeping, where money left trails and lies could be dismembered piece by piece. The morning after Alistair's visit to Amelia, Marcus arrived at Harmony Creek Community Hospital. 2 decades had transformed the modest coastal clinic into a modern medical center with a glass facade and a gleaming atrium. But Marcus wasn't interested in new wings or pediatric wards funded by donors. He wanted the past, the forgotten, dusty basement archives where truth was buried. It didn't take bribery to open those doors. A generous donation for future renovations was enough to convince the board that Marcus Thorne's request should be honored with discretion. Within hours, he was standing before rows of old paper records, the smell of dust and disinfectant heavy in the air. His eyes scanned admission logs until the date burned into Alistair's memory appeared. Late summer, 20 years ago. There it was, a Jane Doe, female, mid-20s, found unconscious on the roadside by a local trucker. Severe concussion, multiple fractures, profound amnesia, admitted under emergency protocols. Marcus's pulse quickened as he copied the record. This was Amelia, or rather, Liana. The date aligned perfectly with the night of the supposed crash. The bridge had swallowed the wreckage, but not her. She had survived, cast ashore into a life without memory. The admission notes mentioned one key name: Robert Finch, the hospital administrator at the time. Marcus's research revealed that Finch had abruptly retired a year later, citing a lucky lottery win that raised eyebrows even then. But Marcus had dug further. He discovered a series of bearer bonds, untraceable but linked through offshore shell corporations. The trail was faint, designed to vanish into the sands of time, but Marcus was relentless. He cross-referenced Sterling Industries' financials from that same year, following the labyrinth of subsidiaries and accounts. And there it was, a $2 million transfer from a Cayman-based company that, after days of digging, connected back to one person, Julian Sterling, Alistair's cousin. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Julian, the smiling relative who had comforted Alistair during the darkest days, who had taken over much of the family business in the aftermath of Liana's death. Julian, who had signed papers, confirmed. Wreckage shielded Alistair from grim logistics. He had been at the center of everything, and now the money trail showed why. Marcus returned to New York with the evidence compiled into a dossier thick enough to end a career. He presented it to Alistair one quiet evening in the Connecticut estate, where the billionaire sat with Leah, no longer Amelia, not fully Liana, but a merging of both. The man's face darkened as each page turned, grief twisting into fury, then into something colder, resolve. "He paid Finch to bury her," Alistair whispered, voice like broken stone. "He knew she had survived. He knew, and he left her there, erased her, so he could keep stealing from me." Marcus closed the file with deliberate care. "Julian has been embezzling from Sterling Industries for years, millions siphoned through layers of shell corporations." Liana noticed before her accident. She was preparing an audit. That made her dangerous. When the crash happened, Julian saw an opportunity. He didn't have to arrange it. Fate did the work. All he had to do was ensure she never returned. And he succeeded. For 20 years. Alistair stood, his tall frame taut with rage. For a moment, he looked as if he might shatter the room with his bare hands. But when he spoke, his tone was not wild. It was icy. "He's been smiling in my face all this time. He buried my wife alive. He stole my company. He stole my life." "We have enough to confront him," Marcus said evenly. "But I recommend we do it through the board, publicly. The company deserves to know who has been bleeding it dry." And so the stage was set. The quarterly board meeting of Sterling Industries convened in a high-rise conference room overlooking the Hudson. The directors expected financial forecasts and sanitized reports. Instead, they found Marcus Thorne standing at the head of the table, flanked by Alistair Sterling himself, alive, sharp, more commanding than he had looked in decades. Julian entered late, smiling as always, holding his leather folio of doctored numbers. He froze when he saw his cousin seated at the head of the table. For the first time in years, Julian's composure cracked. "Alistair," he stammered. "What a surprise. I thought you were still recovering." "I've recovered enough," Alistair said. His voice was iron, stripped of warmth, enough to look at the books. "The ones Leanna tried to show me before you buried her." Color drained from Julian's face. He tried to laugh, but it rang hollow. "This is ridiculous. You're confused." Marcus cut him off, laying the dossier open on the table. "We have traced over $2 million in bearer bonds delivered to Robert Finch the week a Jane Doe was admitted to Harmony Creek. That Jane Doe was Leanna Sterling. Finch has signed an affidavit. The money came from a Cayman account tied directly to your network of shell corporations." The directors leaned forward, whispers rippling through the room. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Charts, transfers, signatures, sworn testimony, layer upon layer of betrayal. Marcus's voice sharpened. "You didn't just steal from this company, Julian. You stole from this family. You condemned a living woman to anonymity so your theft would never be exposed." The silence that followed was suffocating. Julian's breathing grew ragged, his hands trembling as he clutched the folio. He looked around the table, searching for an ally, but every pair of eyes was fixed on him with cold condemnation. Security entered quietly, summoned without words. They moved toward Julian with grim efficiency. He shoved his chair back, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. His world, built on lies and blood, had collapsed. Alistair didn't rise from his seat. He didn't shout or curse. He only watched as his cousin was escorted from the room, a man broken by the truth finally unearthed. There was no triumph in his eyes, only exhaustion. Justice, after 2 decades, was not sweet. It was bitter, a reminder of everything stolen that could never be returned. Back in Queens, Leah sat by the window, the ring warm against her skin. She didn't understand the full storm Marcus and Alistair had unleashed, but she felt its tremors, and when Alara set a hand over hers, she smiled faintly. "The past is stirring," she said, voice unsteady. "I can feel it, like ashes shifting before the flame." For the first time, she wasn't afraid. The storm had broken, and yet, in its aftermath came not chaos, but an unfamiliar quiet. Julian Sterling sat behind bars, stripped of the charm and false authority he had wielded for decades. The board of Sterling Industries moved swiftly to excise his influence, his name removed from documents and hallways, as if history itself wished to erase him. For Alistair, justice did not arrive with applause. It came like a cold wind through a graveyard, satisfaction tangled with grief, the reminder of how much had been lost while deceit thrived. But back in Queens, a different kind of reckoning was unfolding. The tiny walk-up apartment, once sanctuary and prison, had become untenable. Paparazzi swarmed the street outside, their lenses flashing through the thin curtains, their shouts rising into the windows. Neighbors whispered in stairwells, speculation growing with each tabloid headline. Sterling widow found alive, mystery daughter revealed. Alistair refused to let the circus consume them. He arrived quietly, not in a cavalcade of black cars, but in one unremarkable SUV, guarded by professionals whose discretion was absolute. He walked up the worn steps himself, the bouquet of white freesias once again in his hand, and guided Leah and Alara out into a new life. Their destination was not a penthouse in Manhattan, but a sprawling estate in Connecticut. For years, Alistair had owned it but never lived there, a retreat he could never bring himself to inhabit without her. Now the grounds came alive with purpose. Acres of rolling hills and ancient oaks stretched around the house. The gardens, once meticulously maintained by staff, had gone half wild. Yet rows of white freesias bloomed in abundance, planted long ago in her memory, now waiting to welcome her home. Leah walked through the garden paths slowly, her fingers brushing the petals as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. She still did not remember the details of her life as Liana. Faces, places, years remained lost in the fog. But something deeper stirred. The weight of fear in her eyes had lifted. She was no longer Amelia Vance, the woman defined by absence. Nor was she only Leanna Sterling, the wife declared dead. She chose instead to be Leah, a name that bridged the two halves of herself. Alara watched her mother with quiet awe. The haze had cleared from her eyes, replaced with serenity. It was not full recovery, nor had anyone promised it would be. But it was peace, hard-won, delicate, real. Inside the estate, life reshaped itself in smaller, gentler ways. Dinners were no longer solitary rituals taken in silence. Instead, the three gathered around a small table in the breakfast nook overlooking the fields. Alistair, who had spent 20 years eating alone, found himself laughing so hard at Alara's dry observations that he sometimes had to set down his fork. Leah, content, hummed absent-mindedly as she passed him the bread, the same melody that had once bridged the abyss between them. For Alara, the change was staggering. She had grown up rationing groceries, clipping coupons, stretching paychecks. Now, a personal chef asked her preferences, but it wasn't wealth that unsettled her most. It was the suddenness of family. The father who looked at her with eyes brimming, not with scrutiny, but with pride. One evening, she curled up in the vast library, her knees tucked under her, scribbling in the worn notebook she had carried since high school. It was filled with half-formed stories, fragments of thoughts she never believed anyone would read. She startled when Alistair entered quietly. "What are you working on?" he asked, his voice careful. "Nothing," she said quickly, shutting the book. It's silly." He extended a hand. "May I?" Reluctantly, trembling, she passed it to him. He sat in the armchair across from her and read for nearly an hour, turning each page slowly, expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, his eyes glistened. "You have your mother's soul," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and a talent all your own." "This is remarkable. Alara?" Her throat tightened. It was the first time anyone outside her mother had seen her, truly seen her. The validation wrapped around her like a balm on a wound she hadn't known she carried. Days stretched into weeks. The family began to take root in their new sanctuary. Leah walked the gardens each morning, Alistair at her side, their hands clasped. Alara spent long hours writing in the library, the house echoing with a kind of quiet it had never known. Slowly, what had been fractured began to knit together. When the trial came, it was swift. The evidence Marcus had gathered was irrefutable. Julian Sterling, once the smiling face of family loyalty, was sentenced to decades in prison. Alistair attended only the sentencing. He looked at the broken man in the defendant's box and felt no triumph, only pity. Julian's downfall did not heal him. It was Leah's laughter at breakfast, Alara's determined pen scratching across paper, that gave him life again. On a crisp autumn afternoon, 1 year to the day since Alara had served him dessert at Liel, the three of them stood together on the hill overlooking the estate. The trees blazed, red and gold against a sharp blue sky. The air smelled of earth and leaves and freedom. Alistair turned to them, his voice steady. "A year ago, I was a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. I thought I had lost everything, but I was wrong. The best part of her was safe. The best part of her was with you, Ilara." His eyes shone with unguarded love. "You were her anchor. You kept her soul safe until I could find my way back." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside lay the original phoenix ring, restored, gleaming. He took Leah's hand and slid it onto her finger for the second time in his life. It fit perfectly. "For my wife," he said softly. "For Lyanna. For Amelia. For Leah. For the woman who is all of them and stronger than fire." Then he turned to Ilara, handing her a slim leather-bound book. On the cover, embossed in silver, was the title, "The Phoenix's Daughter." It was her collection of stories, printed and bound. Ilara's breath caught. Her mother squeezed her hand, tears bright in her eyes. "We found our way back because of you, my love," Leah whispered. "A mother's love, a daughter's hope, and a ring that remembered when I could not." Ilara looked down at the replica bracelet on her wrist, then at the true ring gleaming on her mother's hand. She understood then. It had begun with 7 innocent words spoken in a restaurant, words that had unlocked the past, exposed betrayal, and raised love from the ashes. And like the twin phoenixes entwined around the sapphire, their family rose, scarred, reborn, whole. This story reminds us how the smallest details can change everything. If it touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe, and tell us your thoughts in the comments.